Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. Daphne Lazar Price is the executive director of the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, JOFA. JOFA advocates for expanding women's rights and opportunities within the framework of halakha to build a vibrant and equitable Orthodox community. She is currently an adjunct professor of Jewish law at Georgetown University Law Center, and prior to JOFA, Daphne worked as the development director at the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism, the RAC. She is also the former director of the Muslim Leadership Initiative, MLI, at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America, and founded the Inter-Jewish Muslim Alliance, where she still serves as an executive board member. Both focus on fostering connections between Jews and Muslims. Daphne's blogs can be found at the Times of Israel. Welcome to the broadcast, Daphne. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Abigail.
So JOFA, I know what JOFA is because my mother has been a proponent, and I know that it was seminal in the Jewish world, but a lot of people don't even know what JOFA is. It's a shanda, but it's true. So help us understand its evolution and what it does today.
Sure. So JOFA came about first as a conference in 1997. It was founded by a woman named Blue Greenberg.
Who is amazing.
Who is amazing. She is the mother of modern Orthodox feminism. Yes, yes. Also like our mom. Our puppy.
Blue Greenberg. I want to make sure we heard the name.
Yes, yes, Blue Greenberg. It started off actually as a conversation around her dining room table of women who were disenchanted Orthodox women with the status quo of what they were able to access in synagogues and schools and opportunities of higher learning. And above all, there was the aguna issue, which is
chained
women who can't be divorced from their recalcitrant husbands unless their husbands issue the writ of divorce called a get. And so it was all of this that was kind of bubbling at the time. Also,
and before we get off of that conference, because I know you tell the story and it's incredible, it just, where they were at first, it was, as you said, sitting around somebody's
dining room table.
And next thing you know, 500 people are signed up once they decide to have a conference.
So they first started to recruit for this conference. Remember, this is 1997. It's before email, before the internet. It's really word of mouth and a little bit of print advertising. They had, Thursday before the conference, I believe the number is 452 people, mostly women, who were registered. And then on the Sunday of the conference, there were over 1,000 women and men who showed up. I was there. I was one of the participants.
You were a
of the
toddler.
I was a small child. Yes,
little toddler feminist.
Little toddler feminist, exactly. I had,
what do you remember about it?
Oh gosh, just the energy in the room. First of all, I actually remember helping to unpack closets of chairs to help set up because they really didn't have.
They weren't prepared.
They were not prepared at all. I also remember. This is just funny. I also remember that there was a fee of $25, which at the time, as a young toddler, was my entire food budget for the week.
Wow.
But I was like, this is really important. And I went and I put down my cash. And then when I walked out, I found a $20 bill in the street. So
there you go.
It's God's way of saying I needed to be there.
And when you say there were men there, I know Rabbi Avi Weiss was there.
Avi Weiss was
Saul
there.
Berman?
Rabbi Saul Berman, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin. There were young rabbinic students there. One of our board members met, so he's on our board, he met his wife there. And was it controversial? Like, did it make waves right away? Oh my gosh, I would say that it was the singular most disruptive event in modern Orthodoxy in North America. Absolutely. It was, first of all, women had never gathered in such big numbers before, certainly not to tackle the important issues of the day. Everything from the Aguna crisis, which was where Blue shattered from the rooftops, where there's a rabbinic will, there's a halachic way, on down to enhancing women's prayer opportunities and learning opportunities, and
leading opportunities.
Leading opportunities for sure. It was a little bit before Maharat came into existence. There was something then called the Torat Miriam Fellowship, which was founded by Rabbis Avi Weiss and Saul Berman, of which I was the first fellow.
Wow.
In that cohort. But it was a place where like-minded women and men came together to really, be in community, to develop ideas, to bounce ideas off each other. And from there, a year later, JOFA actually became officially the organization that it is today.
Which you run.
Which I run, which I have held the position for the last 5 years.
And in terms of its mission now, like how would you define it?
So the mission now, I would say, It is to advocate on behalf of women within the framework of Jewish law to create a vibrant and equitable Orthodox community, which is a lot of words to say that women need to be at every table where decisions are made. And in the Orthodox community, a lot of the decision making, either formal at board tables or informal in morning minyan services, are made by men. And so a lot of times decisions are made and are presented as de facto, and women have been excluded, historically, definitely, deliberately excluded, but sometimes now, even with the best intentions, excluded just because they're just not in the spaces where the decisions are made. And so for us, it's about making sure that women have the knowledge and the tools and the access to be in every space, whether that's synagogue leadership, school leadership, Jewish communal leadership, at every level.
And what's the pushback now? Like, what would you say is the most agitating either controversy or difference of opinion now?
So there is a lot of growth that we've seen in the Orthodox community. And if I'm looking at like one particular example, I would look at the celebration of Purim with the Megillah reading when we read the book of Esther, and how 30 years ago, I can count on one hand maybe how many communities had women-led Megillah reading, and now there are probably close to 200 that we know of. I'm sure that there are more, which is huge. But then there are still the other synagogues in the communities who are like, that's not what we want in our synagogues. Sometimes we're lucky that there is a synagogue in that community, where they're like clustered synagogues to say, if you want that, you can go to that synagogue. But that's not a reason that it can't be in every synagogue. So on the ritual level, certainly on the clergy leadership level, we're still seeing a lot of pushback. JOFA is very lucky to be supported by Michael Philanthropies, where we have something called the Devorah Scholar Initiative, where we fund synagogues to hire women in spiritual leadership roles for a first-time position for that synagogue. And so by the end of this 6 years, I think we'll have about a dozen women who have been placed in those kinds of positions. That's also yielded both a lot of pushback by saying that's not how we do things, but also opened a lot of doors of synagogues re-examining what it is to have women's leadership in synagogues. And maybe they don't want a full-time woman holding that role, but maybe they want something else, something in between, and they don't want to call it spiritual leadership or clergy-like leadership, but they recognize the need and the gap of women's leadership in synagogues.
And you once wrote in a piece for JTA, it can be lonely to be an advocate for Orthodox Jewish women. Why?
Why? So I will say that there is a diversity, just in terms of advocating on behalf of Orthodox women. There is a diversity of what that means to be an advocate for Orthodox women. Not all Orthodox women want those entry points into the ritual spaces and the leadership spaces. Maybe they want more entry points into the higher learning spaces. And so sometimes there's a balance of association. Sometimes it is lonely to be an Orthodox feminist because feminists and secular Jewish feminists place the blame on Orthodox feminists for upholding the patriarchy and maintaining those structures without giving the respect for saying, this is the community that we choose to live in. I happen to like being very proximate to my synagogue. I happen to like having very close-knit neighbors, and that comes with being in an Orthodox community that
so
you don't have. So
I'm going to pause there,
Yep.
because you are an Orthodox Jew.
Yes, I'm an Orthodox Jew.
And you have your own lines, I'm sure, which you don't have to necessarily share at this table.
Thank you.
But what you're describing is that there are, what more progressive Orthodox, I don't know if they're Orthodox or non-Orthodox Jews, saying, why are you still essentially upholding something that is unequal and unfair? And I know that's simplistic, but is that the kind of where you feel like there's a tension point, or even something like a minyan? Like, why, after all of this revolution, is there still that sense that I think many Orthodox feminists still feel that they even wouldn't say that a woman makes a minyan complete? Am I right? Just as an example of like where there still are red lines.
I want to say that when it comes to minyan as minyan itself, minyan is a halachic construct. It's a Jewish legal construct that allows for people to recite Kaddish and to read from the Torah and to recite another set of prayers after the Shmona Esrei. As we learned from the pandemic, prayers are prayers. They're personal prayers, whether there's a minyan or not, whether you're male or female. And so there is this sticking point of the minyan. What I would
I just want to say, you said the pandemic, because there couldn't be gathering.
There couldn't be gathering. So there couldn't be gathering. I'm glad that you're circling back to this. There couldn't be gathering. So for months, there was no gathering. From March through June, whatever it was in 2020, there were no gatherings at all. And then over time, New York State and Maryland and other states started to say, we can have in-person gatherings in houses of worship maxed at 10. Now, for a lot of the non-Orthodox streams, they just maintained remote, meaning like Zoom services, which worked for them 7 days a week, or mostly when they had it Friday night and Saturday. Ironically, that's not what works for the Orthodox community, because we don't use technology that way. And so what that meant was that synagogues had to make a choice of either having a minyan, a quorum of 10 men, excluding women, or saying we're going to offer space to women to come and pray in community without minyan, or trying to find some compromise where a lot of places said, can you give us the give of 12 people instead of 10? And that way we could hold spots for women. And especially during the pandemic, where people lost a lot of relatives and nobody had the opportunity to say Kaddish in a way to honor their loved one. And there were women who wanted to be in that space also. What we advocated for was each shul, each synagogue should make their own decision, but that women should be at the decision-making table. Because also what they were modeling is what was important for the community, meaning the adults involved, but also the children. What were they modeling for the children by saying women aren't welcome in this space at all? Mm. And so different communities responded differently. There were communities that said first come, first serve, whoever comes. And then the other extreme of we're just going to have only spots for men, and then the compromise in between of we'll hold spots for 10 men and then 2 for women. So it ran the gamut.
But if we go back to the loneliness, just because I don't want to leave that quite yet. I think sometimes people don't understand the heat that you're taking. Mm-hmm. And I remember I was lucky enough to do a story for New York Magazine on the ordination of Rabbi Sarah Horowitz, and just looking at the vitriol and the bile that came at her very personally, I just thought even the strongest person would have a hard time withstanding that. So is that part of your daily diet, unfortunately?
I would say yes, and I don't read the comments. There are people who know me, and whether they support the work that I do or they don't, they reach out to me personally and say, wow, that was really great, or I wish you would have rethought that a little bit. Maybe you haven't thought of the ramifications. The people who don't have the menschlichness of reaching out to me personally and just call out, just make things up, I don't have patience for that. So I just keep doing the work that I do, and that's it.
So you had, I think, a very kind of personal turning point after October 7th. We all did. Mm-hmm. It was a wake-up call in so many ways, but particularly when it comes to your feminist allies. Can you just talk a little bit about it and how you've processed it?
Sure. So I want to say at the outset that I was in Israel on October 7th. I was awake when the rockets started to go off.
You were there with your family?
I was there with my family. I have 2 daughters who are 16 and 19. They both live in Israel. I'm exceedingly proud of them. One of them is in a boarding school in Israel. She's in 11th grade and is rocking it out. The other one just entered a lone soldier program, and she will be joining the Army once she's done with all of the orientation pieces. And so they were already there, and we were visiting them, and the war broke out. And it became very clear almost immediately, anecdotally, from the rumors that we started to hear that were coming in, mostly about, we first heard that Sderot was broken into and people were kidnapped from their homes, and that was shocking. And then we heard about the Nova party that had been taking place, and specifically about targeting young women. And then once the holiday was over and we fully turned on our TVs, right, there was also debate like, do you check your phone? What do you do? Is this pikuach nefesh? Is this a case of saving a life? And so there was like different levels of like what we were checking. But once we saw the footage of Naama Levy being grabbed by her hair and thrown into the car, it was clear that this was like something that they were, first of all, that they were video on their GoPros, and that this is what they were celebrating, was I was horrified. And I really expected to see a galvanization of feminist groups and individuals across lines of faith and race and economic levels come together to say, this is awful. And instead, we heard silence, and then we heard questioning, and then gaslighting, and then it took the New York Times 3 months to have a few men write an article saying, yes, this happened, and then the pushback that happened against that, and the silence of UN women, and I can keep going on, and it just felt like my advocacy world was getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because even though my career before JOFA was spent in public advocacy at the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism. That's a story for another time. But we worked closely with all kinds of feminist advocates on combating sex trafficking. Where are those people today? Where are the advocates who are advocating against violence against women, or violating about violence against women? And where are they? Again, UN women. Where are they? The UN writ large. Where are they? Right. The fact that only now that the special representative from the UN only now, literally like yesterday, issued a report saying that, yes, they concur that sexual violence happened against women and is still being perpetrated against the hostages who are being held in Gaza is nothing short of astonishing. And still we're hearing people second guess or demanding that survivors come forward, or demanding that the footage that we know that there's 47 minutes of footage that has been condensed, thank you, and to be shared with various audiences in order to demonstrate that, yes, this happened, which is a standard that doesn't exist for other communities, is just appalling.
And there's so many times where I've heard people say, believe the women has been this mantra, particularly since the Me Too explosion.
And now it's Me Too unless you're a Jew.
It's incredibly deflating.
Yep.
You write, these days I'm so sad. This is a piece you wrote November 27th, a remarkable piece in JTA.
Thank you.
Sad for the tremendous losses all around. And on a personal level, I'm also sad that I devoted so many years of my life to groups that don't seem to care about me or my pain. What was that? I mean, what you're describing is an outrage. I'm just going to say that. I'll take off my journalist's hat and just to say unequivocally unacceptable to me. But just the idea that you have been in relationship with so many people, working towards kind of common values and goals. So how do you make that repair?
I don't know that it's my repair to make. Meaning, I will just say, it is not my repair to make. If you and I, in particular, if you and I have been in a relationship before, and you know that this conflict is deeply personal, A, because I was there, B, because my kids were there, C, because I have countless relatives there and friends who are like family also, and you're really okay with either sitting by or gaslighting or advocating for the destruction of the state of Israel and the erasure of what happened to women and all of that, and basically you're just, well, in a nutshell, if you're advocating for the destruction of the state of Israel, you're basically advocating for the destruction of half of world Jewry. So that's a big thing, but not necessarily what we're talking about here.
It's a pretty big thing.
But I just want to name
that.
Okay, but I do want to name that, and I'm sorry to be laughing.
No, it's
otherwise
laughing at the horror.
Yep, again, if you know me and you believe me, then you need to A, support what I'm saying, and B, be more vocal about this violence against women. I will say that I had been sitting at several multi-faith tables, and most of those have disbanded. There is one small group of women who I still meet with monthly, and they asked to gather and support me over Zoom while I was still in Israel. We left, it took us about 2 weeks to get out after the war broke out, and I was describing what had happened and what I was feeling and what the overall atmosphere was. And one of the women said, well, there must be more. There must be like a backstory to this. And I said, no, full stop. this is like sexual violence against women. This is people who broke into sleeping families' homes, who stole whole families and butchered. At that point, we didn't even know the numbers, right? At that point, it was 200, 500. We know now that it was 1,200, and so many more who are suffering. And I said, full stop. Like, there is rape is not resistance. None of this is resistance. This is straight up terrorism.
What do they mean by a backstory? Like a context?
Like a context, yes, like a context. Like these families, these communities must have done something in order to deserve the ire and the terror of the Hamas terrorists and everybody else who helped to perpetrate these crimes. And I said, no, there is no backstory. There is no context. These are people, and in particular, the party goers and the families who live there were, in general, the ones who were in the peace camp. They were the families were the ones who were driving Palestinian families from the Gaza border to receive medical treatment.
You had Vivian Silver, strong activist.
Exactly. These are people who employed people who lived in the Gaza Strip in their homes and in their communities, and this violence came from nowhere perpetrated against them.
And so when you said that, I mean, how did that conversation go?
So they heard it, and they've repeated it back. I've seen them repeat it back in other spaces, and still it's such a small number of people who are saying sexual violence is never okay. It doesn't matter the context. If there is a context, sexual violence is never okay. So
you just went back with a group very specifically to talk to women. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So I can tell you on November 6th, so roughly exactly a month after the war broke out, one of my board members reached out and said, we should do a mission. And I said, that's a great idea. And we partnered very closely with Yeshivat Maharat. You mentioned Rabbi Sarah Horowitz before. And so they brought students and graduates to be part of the delegation. We had lay leaders and other JOFA friends and people who were interested in going to Israel under a slightly different umbrella. And we partnered also very closely with Kolech, that's run by Sharon Brickdeshen. They're kind of our sister organization in Israel, where we really developed this itinerary looking very closely through a gender-based lens. And so for us, that meant meeting with people in the know about the sexual violence that was perpetrated against women and children, meeting with leadership that is looking at some of the intersections of Jewish law and gender and the war, especially because Israel does not have a separation of religion and state, and so there are things that are impacting there, and talking to women on the ground doing the work, and a lot of a good amount of Torah learning also. And so it was a mission that just brought together mostly women and some men who wanted to explore this war and to witness what was happening on the ground through a gender-based lens, because women are never at the forefront of anything, including when so much of this war, the violence was centered around women. And so that was that. It was mid-January we went. It was 3 days and 2 nights, and it was, I think, the most intense 3 days of my life.
How come?
How come? Yeah, first of all, it was very dense. Everything was very raw. Everything still is very raw. Even though I'd been there October 7th, this was my first time walking in the space where the atrocities happened, in Kfar Aza, in Re'im. We sat down with a unit of Tatzpitaniot. That's the army unit of women who are the army spotters. This was like a sister unit to the unit who actually tried to warn the IDF about what was coming down the pike. And so we heard from them about the intensity of their work, about how what it is for them to be heard and believed, and also the fact that they lost so many of their friends. They were all trained together, and this entire other unit was decimated on October 7th.
Hostage Square, what was that?
Oh my gosh, Hostage Square. So Hostage Square is. I have to say also, I just want to say that anybody who can go to Israel should go to Israel and walk in these same spaces. And please God, all the hostages should be home now. And still, there is still so much to be learned and absorbed. And I think just so important to really understand the experience. So Hostage Square, there are a lot of exhibits there that depicts what's going on in Gaza. There's a replica of a tunnel. There's artwork. There is music. A lot of pictures, obviously. We met with 4 fabulous women while we were in Hostage Square. We met with Rabbanit Anat Sharbat, who every Shabbat she's at Hostage Square. She makes Kiddush for the families that are there, and Havdalah Saturday night when Shabbat ends. So that is like a strong model of women's leadership. And her cousin Idan is still being held in Gaza. He was kidnapped on October 7th. We met with Natalie Ben-Ami, who's a young 17-year-old girl, young woman, whose father is still held in captivity. Her mother was released in the hostage exchange in November. And we met with Shelley Shem Tov, whose son is still held in captivity. She talks about what it is to be a mother, knowing that her son hasn't seen the light of day. He's an asthmatic and needs an inhaler. He has celiac, and all they're being given is pita, and you could feel her pain. And then there was the coordinator of the hostage volunteer, the volunteers from the Hostage Square. Her name is Meirav Bender Safti, and she is just a force to be reckoned with. These people they're living out everybody's worst nightmare of what it is to have loved ones stolen away by terrible, terrible, terrible people, and without any sign of life in the 151 days.
Horrific.
Yeah.
So what would you say for those of us who feel helpless now, after what you've seen, and particularly this mission? What could we do?
What can we do? We can start with calling our members of Congress and the White House and not letting them off the hook. There are also American hostages that are held there. This isn't just a Jewish situation. This isn't just an Israeli situation. This is an international situation. And so for Americans, whether you're Jewish or not, no matter how you feel about the conflict and about the occupation, nobody should be being held by Hamas for any amount of time, ever. And so anybody can pick up the phone and call their member of Congress and the White House and advocate for their release.
You touched on how late the UN has been to this game in terms of recognizing what was done, and they're still sort of floating the idea that not everything is documented, that there's still some question about the veracity of these attacks. So when it comes particularly to the gender lens, which is your expertise, and being outspoken on behalf of these women, what would you recommend there?
So the first thing I would say is, let's apply the same standard as when we say Me Too, that it shouldn't be Me Too unless you're a Jew. We should just believe women. Secondly, there is this ridiculous standard that people are demanding that the women who survive the sexual violence come forward and speak out. That's not a standard that's applied to anybody else. We respect victims' privacy. We respect their right to retain dignity. For those who didn't survive, we need to respect the family's dignity. Also, we're talking about Israel, which we say in the world there's 6 degrees of separation. In Israel, there's 1, maybe 2. And so we know exactly who is who, either directly or because they're my next door neighbors, whatever, or my cousins, whoever. And so this notion of respecting privacy and believing them is something that just needs to be applied by feminists and people writ large. So that I would say is top of mind. The other also, like similarly, for if there are families who are advocating on behalf of their family members who are kidnapped or who were murdered on October 7th, believe them also. The same thing also for the first responders who appeared in the what we call the OTEF on October 7th. The police, the army, the Zaka officials. Zaka are the volunteer unit who go and collect dead bodies, and in this case collected many pieces of dead bodies and blood and other flesh fragments. Believe them also. There needs to stop being this second guessing or doubting, and certainly the gaslighting of what we experienced on October 7th.
Thank you so much, Daphne, for coming. I want to make sure those who have never gone to the website, it's actually a really good website.
Thank you.
JOFA.org, that's JOFA.org. Thank you for all you are doing.
Thank you for all you're doing. Thank you so much.
I'm Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight. I'll see you next time.